Welcome to Conflict Managed. I'm your host, Mary Brown. Conflict Managed is a weekly podcast about toxic work environments and how to fix them. We're glad you're here. Good morning, Kenyada, and welcome to Conflict Managed.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
I know we're going to have a very interesting conversation, especially given the book and books that you have written. But before we get to what you're currently doing, I would like you to tell us about the first job you ever had as a young person.
I think the first job I ever had of note, because I cut grass, I would cut my grass, and then my father at one point commissioned me to cut my neighbor's grass, which I did one time at a rate that was extraordinarily low, even for me. I thought it wasn't a fair rate, so I didn't want to do it again. But I worked at a t-shirt company um, for a summer, so designing what would be printed on the shirts, printing them, watching the production and manufacture of the t-shirts themselves from the fabric, the various fabrics. So that was an interesting experience. That was probably one of the first most notable experiences that I've had.
What was first interesting about it, and then what was like the environment, the sort of cultural, how it felt to work there? What was the management like?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I haven't thought about that in years. So this is sort of an interesting reflection. I think the management, they were pretty good overall. They had a good relationship. There were a couple of guys so I'm from the Bahamas. They're from another country in the Caribbean. And it was mostly an environment of women who were putting together shirts, tailoring them. And then there was one lady who was I guess, the resident artist and designer and so forth. And so I got to rotate between the various groups, of which there were not so many, but they did quite different things, and
Mhm.
see the whole process, the value add chain. And so I thought that was great. In terms of the relationship, there seemed to be obviously a clear distinction between those who are managers and others, but people were working together quite closely and in a somewhat casual environment and certainly a collegial environment. And so I thought it was a good example of people working together to achieve.
What a great sort of first notable experience to have that kind of ease, seeing people work together, but also then being introduced to see the kinds of work which people are doing and the way
Yes.
they're doing it, and to get even a fuller picture. A lot of times people's first job is, they're doing the fries, or, it's very specific, and there's certainly value in that, but it seems like a nice experience to just come into that.
Yeah, and it was high school, and actually because the job went well over the summer, they offered to keep me on
Mm.
for some time after school, and so I would go in periodically and help out, and it was a great segue into, I guess, a more stable and clear and firm frame of mind around what it means to work. But I think you raise an interesting and very good point around the diversity of work. I remember it was quite random. You can see this all across the city. I'm in New York City. You can see this anywhere. But I happened to be in Germany at the time when I had this reflection. And there were a couple of guys just sitting in a delivery truck, driving from one point to another. I was a pedestrian. And for some reason, at that point, I observed those guys and I thought, I don't know if these guys ever sit in front of a computer. I don't know to what extent they're ever reading anything for their jobs, yet they're making money. And then
Mm.
within that same time frame, I sat down in a coffee shop, and I think the owner was a Turkish guy, a man and wife, and he was making the coffee, and they had cakes, and they made the sandwiches, and I thought, what an interesting way to make a living. You don't have to be in an office. You don't have to have this very, frankly, quite narrow corporate America mindset or framework. And of course, we see that across America. It's not just that it's corporate America versus somewhere else, and other people in other places. But this sort of corporate, very rigid framework, even if it is across industries, it could be banking or law or engineering, whatever it is. There's just so many interesting ways, and it's, I think, a reflection of the different intelligences as well that we have and that people can avail themselves of. So if you don't have a particular strength in one area, then you probably would do better not to torture yourself in it and to be relatively mediocre in it, whereas you can go and do something else that's much more aligned with who you are, or more frankly, and I think more appropriately, how you want to live.
Excellent. I love everything that you just said. I couldn't agree more. And it is interesting because there's such a breadth and variety of kinds of jobs that people can do to be gainfully employed that take all different kinds of skills. And yet still, it's this very narrow path that's laid in front of people and a
Right.
very narrow understanding of what intelligence is, a certain kind. Um, and thank goodness that that people seem to find their way around to find what actually resonates with them, so that they're successful and that our culture is successful, because we need all different kinds
Right.
of ways of being, of people using their gifts. But then that takes people thinking about, okay, well, what is unique to me, and how do I find that, so that I can be the best me at whatever kind of job I'm going to do, so that I live the life that I want to live, but also my community benefits as well.
And I think that last point is super important because as you were discussing, I was already thinking about not just what happens to this individual within their workspace or how they manifest their intelligence, but what's happening to them in terms of how they feel, and
Mhm.
then how do they engage with other people in their lives, at home or their friends. So if you're actually less stressed, even if you're not doing a fancy job or getting dressed or having a fancy place to sit to do your work, are you more content in your life? And then what are the downstream effects? What's your contribution as a result of that? It's not economic necessarily, but it might be so much more valuable in terms of what you're modeling and how you're engaging with other people. So I think that last point is especially aligned with what I was thinking.
Yeah, this whole question about, if we start backwards and or at the end, right? Start with the end in mind. Well, what kind of life do I want to live? What
Right,
is what does that look like to me? How much disposable income, or what kind of income do I need in order to live this kind of life?
right.
And what if I want this kind of life, what are the kinds of jobs or things that I can do to live that life? If we start thinking
Hmm.
about it that way, and about
Right,
who I am as a person, then we are going to, I think, we've got so many ills in society. I mean, society throughout time's always got ills, but right now we're dealing
right.
with this loneliness epidemic, and just people a kind of despair and just a dissatisfaction. And I wonder if, I mean, there's a lot of things that we could do on this, but one is thinking about, well, what do I want to feel like? Not just at work,
Right,
but all around. And then what do I need to do to reach that? And is this current job, can I rethink this current job or this field I'm in to reach that goal? Or do I need to radically change a little bit, but to get me to where it is I want to go?
right. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, when I think about, your comment about loneliness, a number of things came to mind. So I think obviously the fact that a lot of people are dispersed, we're geographically more dispersed as families than probably at any other point in time in history. So being in proximity to siblings, to parents, certainly to grandparents or other elders, people who could help with the children, that sort of thing, we're much more isolated, or at least in this part of the world. I think
Mhm.
generally, but there are other parts of the world where, people are much closer, where people stay, they continue living at home for much longer. So, at least as far as proximity is concerned, there probably isn't as much loneliness, in the past as there is today. But you can also be in close proximity to people and still feel very lonely because you don't
Right.
feel understood, because there really
Yes.
isn't good communication. So, for as much communication and communication aids that exist from a technological perspective, social media, I think a lot of the downside that those things create is, I mean, they're advertising platforms. So everything is aspirational, and probably nothing makes you feel more lonely than looking at your life and where you are, even though it may be perfectly fine, and comparing it to this other thing where there's so much distance, right? Psychic and economic distance. And so that probably also helps to create a sense of isolation. We're working more in places that are not necessarily as connected to the earth as we once were when we were into subsistence and agriculture. And, within that framework, you're still working with family members and neighbors. And
Mhm.
so there's a tremendous amount, particularly living in a place like New York. I mean, you're surrounded by people, and it's not common or as common as in many or most other places to just strike up a conversation with someone on the street. You might do it within a framework,
Mhm.
at a restaurant or, at a museum or something like that. But just moving around, it's quite isolating, and those things become more and more normalized. So we've got the greatest connectivity and ability to travel and move around as we've ever had in human history. And to your point, we probably feel as isolated as ever. So probably just requires us to figure out where do we find our community, how do we find our community, and then how do we maintain a connection with those communities. And it's probably much more simple than what we've been doing.
Mm. My gosh, I love that so much. As you were talking, I was thinking about a lot of stuff. First, I want to talk about proximity, but let's come back to that. We have all of these tools, and you could set down all the components and all the tools that I need to build a computer, and I've got everything out there.
Yeah.
I'm not going to build a computer. I don't know how. And I
Right.
think we've been focusing so much on making things available and having the tools, but if I don't know what they are, how to use them,
Right.
how to think about striking up a conversation or what a community looks like, where I find it, what are my duties and responsibilities to be a good community member, and what should I be expecting from others? If we don't put that as a part of the tool available, is how to use it, the manual, um, the human manual, really understanding what that is, um, then we're going to get more and more isolated, even though somebody might say, but we have all of these things available, right? So now it's just
Right.
my own fault, right? I've got all these clubs I can join and all these online platforms and all these ways to be connected with people who are interested in the little niche things that I am, but I don't use them, or I don't know how to, or I feel the awkwardness and I don't know how to get over it. Uh,
Right.
and so how do you see that? The need, because we're human persons, by nature, we tend toward community in the work environment. So what is work for? Should we be seeking community at work, or is that just a misunderstanding of what should be happening at work?
Well, I don't think it's a misunderstanding at all. I think the degree to which we should be seeking community, first of all, I don't think that that should be your primary community. So that's number one.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's perfectly fine, acceptable, makes sense for it to be community, depending on the nature of your work, depending on the nature of the people. And so, obviously, if you're working at a not, at a nonprofit, and you're trying to help kids or you're building homes together, it probably makes it a little easier or in some instances more sensible, depending on the work for there to be a more tight-knit community. Some some work, if you're just assembling car doors, it's nice if you're friends with the people around you, but I don't know that that necessarily needs to be community as far as getting the work done is concerned. So there are a number
Mm-hmm.
of different ways of looking at it.
Mm-hmm.
As far as what you need, well, just depends on you and the people around you, the chemistry, your personality, and then the environment. So there really isn't a hard and fast rule. I think there are a tremendous number of complexities or different points along the spectrum to take into consideration. There's nothing wrong with having community at work, but I think a big part of the problem for a lot of people is that they identify so decidedly with their jobs and with their companies and with their title and where they are in the hierarchy and the community in that way, that when that goes away, they're completely lost. They don't know who they are, but also they may sacrifice some meaningful relationships in other communities, other more important communities along the way. And so I think it can be quite dangerous. It's useful, it can be helpful, it can advance, your objective, the organization's mission and the contribution to society, but it also has tremendous sharp edge on the other
Mm-hmm.
side.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it just so depends, right? I would say
It
that
depends.
community is very important, but what somebody needs at what time in their life, how much they need, what kind of support they need, where they think they should be getting it. I agree that if work, I mean, certainly there are caveats, but if work is your primary source for community, you are setting yourself up for, um, I think, not understanding what the nature of work is, what's going on there. Uh, but of course, it does depend. But that's
Right.
why it takes self-reflection, that I need to know what is it that I want from work? What am I
Right.
expecting? What do I think my colleagues are expecting? Right. So,
Right.
what are their needs at this time? And if I think everyone's thinking about work in the way that I am, well, I am wrong because people
Right.
think about it in so many different sorts of ways, depending on where they
Absolutely.
are and their own, family of origin and what's going on outside of work for them.
What do you think people can do to become more self-aware? So you referenced, self-reflection actually.
Mhm.
What are some ways that people, can or should be thinking about that?
Just really a believer in being curious. Right? If I ask myself questions, like children are so good at asking all these questions, why?
Absolutely.
And they are these little social scientists and they ask all these really good questions about the world and then we sort of beat it out of them, right?
Right.
And if we don't, not that we need to ask questions all the time, but we do need to ask basic human questions. What do I want? Why do I want it? Why do I think that's going to get me what I want? What am I doing here? What kind of professional am I? How do other people feel around me? What am I bringing to the table? What are my blind spots? Where do I want to be going? These kinds of questions, if you don't have answers to those relatively basic human questions, why are you surprised that you're not getting what you want if you don't know what that
Right.
is, right? And
Right.
so I think you can start building, there's a lot of things you can do, but you can start by just asking questions about yourself. Who
Hmm.
am I? What do I want? Where do I want to go? And
Right.
those are actually really hard questions, but they lead you to answers, what leads to more questions. What do
Yeah.
you think? How do you think people can do
No,
this?
I agree with you. I mean, the only thing I might say is they feel hard. They feel hard because we do it so infrequently. But
Yeah.
the reality is, I don't know how hard it is. And I'm sort of like debating as I think about it, right? I think it is challenging to kind of shut out the noise. That's probably the hard part.
Mhm.
And to dedicate a certain amount of time and to have the willingness to confront yourself. People,
Mhm.
sometimes I say, not often do I say, but I often think some of the laziest people are the hardest working.
Mhm.
They're the busiest ones. They're doing the most. So they're not lazy in terms of how they're expending actual energy and how they're using their time, but the quality of time that they're putting out there, the direction and the intentionality is where the laziness comes in because they won't sit down to
Mhm.
reflect on how do I best even achieve this thing, or how do I best set a path for myself and then figure out milestones and ways to achieve those things.
Mhm.
And it's sort of like going to therapy or even going to the doctor or going to the gym. We can find a million reasons not to. We can
Mhm.
find it challenging to do so, but there's almost always a reward, a short term, a medium term, and certainly a long term reward for doing that work. And so it's not easy to kind of separate yourself from all the noise. But if you really sit down and say to yourself, what do I want? Nobody can answer that question for you better than you. But we have generally allowed advertisers and peer pressure and social pressure to dictate what it is that we think we want. But the reality is, we may want something that's considerably more simple, potentially easier to obtain, and almost certainly more valuable and impactful in life than the path that we're currently on. So I think doing that is extremely important. And then having, frankly, that sort of relationship, and that is building the relationship with yourself. So I observe people who are journaling, people who meditate, people who do therapy, people who never miss their Pilates class or whatever the case is, go for a walk in the morning. All of this is a part of building the relationship with ourselves, which I
Mhm.
think sadly is not something that we do generally. Most people don't. And we certainly, those of us who even do, may not do it as well as we could. And it's a work in progress, just like any relationship. It
Mhm.
requires maintenance, right? It requires
Mhm.
effort. And so the same has to be true for us. And once we do that, and by virtue of doing that, then we can start getting to, the what do I want and the who am I at a deeper level.
Gosh, I love that. So we all know, I mean, I think that you would ask just about any person, stranger off the street, having this sort of intentional practice about knowing yourself. about what you want and this relationship with yourself, that it's going to be beneficial. I will have a richer life. I will more likely hit my goals because I even know what my goals are, and I'll be able to maybe right size the pain, and maybe even the promise of what I think I want. So why do people not do this?
I think probably for a couple of the reasons I mentioned that there's just a lot of distraction.
Mm,
There's a lot of noise. So when people wake up oftentimes, and I'm frankly not that much different in this regard. When I wake up, I don't always or immediately reach for the phone, but relatively quickly.
mhm,
I want to see what's happening in the market. I want to see, did anything major happen overnight from a news perspective? But I am not plugged to or attached to my phone in throughout the whole morning or throughout the whole day. There are times when I put it down. There are times when I may do something else that's much simpler. I'll make a cup of tea, go for a walk. I don't put earbuds or earphones on almost ever anymore. Not that I never will again, but even transatlantic flights, 8 hours on the plane, I'm not listening to any podcast, I'm not listening to any music. Sometimes I'm just reading, of course, but sometimes I'm just thinking, sometimes I'm just writing. And I think that is one of the, really important ways that we can start to reclaim some of our time and reclaim our direction because we've all sort of doom scroll on some social media or gone down the YouTube rabbit hole. And it can be interesting, but if you stop and think about it, wherever you ended up and all the things you saw, they may be interesting to some extent, but they're probably not contributing to your life in any meaningful way. And it's not really a good use of your time in any meaningful way. And so it's just a lot of stuff being thrown at you, flashing lights and sounds that are distracting you from your purpose. So I'm not suggesting that you shouldn't do it ever, but I think we should understand that it is perhaps entertainment more than a necessity, more than here's how I am going to spend hours of my day. And if you look at, on your phone, it'll tell you how much time you've spent on screens and in certain apps. Invariably, when you look at the data, I think most people are surprised at how much time and how quickly time passes by without having actually achieved anything or done anything. The amount of energy and time that we spend, even then, we may not necessarily feel better
yeah.
as a result of, having spent that time. So I think really being purposeful, being intentional, trying to reclaim time, having quiet time is really, really important. And this is something that a lot of people who meditate or who advocate for meditation really they're preaching, and I think that we can benefit from.
Yeah. It's interesting when we think about social media intake or just entertainment, right? And there's nothing wrong with being entertained. In fact, that's a good thing to want entertainment. But the question is in what quantity, right? So like sugar is going to be fine depending on who you are, but for most of us, some. But if your diet is mostly sugar, we'd say that's going to be problematic. It might taste good, but it's not going to get you what it is that you really want. And after you've eaten a bunch of it, you don't feel good afterwards, right?
That's
And
right.
so really thinking about what role does entertainment play in the good life, right? And so if you consume too much, you even dull the pleasure of it, right?
Right.
So this real idea of quiet, what we get, not pacifying ourselves, not numbing ourselves out. Or social media can be just like a drug, right? Why do people, a lot of times people take drugs to numb out because of the pain, because of the turmoil. And excessive social media use is certainly a way to numb out, to not have to think, to be constantly entertained, so
Right.
that, right, and being passive in our own life instead of being active and
Right.
deciding when and where.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
So I want to hear a little bit more about where you went after your t-shirt days. So can you just kind of give us a trajectory of how you got to where you are right now?
Well, that's
It's a big task.
we're gonna cover quite a few decades. I'll see about doing it in, a minute, 60 to 90 seconds. So, I was in high school. I graduated around 17, started university, did 2 years uh where I'm from, and then I transferred to Colorado to do more school. I got a master's in accountancy and started working in one of the big four firms. I did that for about 6 years, 5 years. and became a CPA, and I have a number of other certifications in anti-money laundering and fraud, and some other things. And so I had a pretty good start to the career overall, and worked in telecom. This was all in Colorado. And then about 15 years ago, I moved to New York. And so I've spent the last, more than a decade working at big banks, the two biggest banks in the country and amongst the biggest banks in the world. But um, I was an auditor. I worked in compliance and risk. I worked in capital markets, and I worked in the consumer bank. I was, the audit director over the retail bank at one of the banks in my last role, and that I think was probably closer to the blend of what I want to do ultimately and what I had been doing. It was a nice bridge because, with tens of millions of customers in your purview or within your portfolio, you have a lot of responsibility for making sure that the regulations that the government puts in place are being met, but not just met technically, but it's also met in the spirit. I had a responsibility for training and developing other people and working closely with other people and working with people whom I liked quite a bit personally, but also had to manage the professional relationship. I worked with people who I did not like personally and who I did not like professionally, and that was mostly because of maybe not seeing eye to eye in terms of what professional requirements
Mm.
might be asking of us. Some of that could be judgmental and interpretive, and some of that may just be pure differential treatment and outlook on other things. And so I think those are the sorts of experiences that help to refine me professionally,
Mhm.
that help to refine me personally, that helped me to understand where some of my strengths were and the areas in which I should double down on areas of moral courage or integrity. And there were also instances where I thought, okay, I probably may have been motivated correctly, but perhaps I wasn't as patient as I could have been or should have been, or
Mm.
maybe I could have handled that a little bit differently. Instead of speaking to this person, I should have spoken to that person. I mean, so there are always lessons to take away. And I think they're all material. Well, there are material lessons in each of the categories. All lessons are certainly not all material. But there are implications and impacts and things to take away. And so I benefited a tremendous amount throughout my whole career. There was never a time or a place where I didn't learn a lot about business, a
Mhm.
lot about the industry, but also a tremendous amount about myself and how I want to be as a person, as a professional, as a father, as a family member, and as a friend. And so I think have all been extremely valuable. But when I look back at my time in corporate America, and it's not to suggest that I'll never go back. I don't know that I'll ever go back, frankly, but it's possible. But I think as I look back at that, I've taken a more intentional uh, view of what it is that my life can or should look like. I did some executive education at the Harvard Business School, and so I'm an alum there, and I participate in the communities there and the opportunities and the things that I've learned, the opportunities to engage and get different perspectives with some of those people that would never have happened had I kept a single eye forward in my career. But I was always sort of curious, what else could there be? What else and how else can I contribute and to whom else? And so I think trying to answer those questions have led to that pivot from the career path that I built over the 25 years, leveraging those attributes and those skills and those lessons, but now applying them elsewhere.
Mm. So what are you currently doing?
So I'm doing a number of things. So I'm an executive coach. And so I've got a coaching business and I really enjoy that because it allows for the mentorship and allows for leveraging executive level experience over all these years and in these sort of competitive and challenging, high pressure environments. Also thinking about what it means to be a family member and a friend. What does it mean to have a relationship with myself? So these are the three domains that I speak about in my book, The New Alpha. Actually, I've got a copy right here.
Yes.
Um, So yeah, the new alpha, and I talk about these three key domains for our relationships, and now I'm really trying to help others who may be struggling with that balance, who may be hyper focused on the next step, the next promotion, the next bonus, or just keeping your job
Mhm.
with living a full, rich life, a well-rounded life, and a well-examined life. And so that is really consistent with my own journey. Having written this book, this was a process of really just making notes from therapy sessions and meetings and reflections. And I thought to myself, I think this could be useful because I can see my own progress.
Mhm.
I know that the conversations that I've had with my friends when they've come to ask for advice or when I've just offered it, there have been some benefits there. And I think this could help other people. And so that's really been my primary focus at this point.
I love a variety of things that you said, progress, a life well lived, this journey. And a lot of times when we're looking at the next or doing something, we want to know the formula, do it, and be done with it. But everything that you've been saying is that's not it, right? It's this
Right.
journey that you're on. It's a process to get better, to develop. Have you always had that outlook? Have you always been someone from your very first days of thinking about the developing self-reflection, or was that a shift for you?
Well, I've always been intellectually curious. I've always just been curious about the world around me. And I think in many ways, and I haven't really thought about this too much in the past or not this way, but even as we were speaking at the beginning, I recognize that I have some very childlike qualities in terms of my persistent inquiry, my candor and frankness. Not that there's a lack of diplomacy or lack of tact. I can be very, thoughtful about how I frame something up or my word choice. I'm quite deliberate about, but sort of just not being pressured into conformity.
Mhm.
And so that I think has always been a part of who I was. That was cultivated, I think, by my parents and encouraged by them. And I have a very strong sense of not just who I am, but of what I think is the right thing. That doesn't always mean that I'm right about it, but the intention is there. And usually I would say that I'm not far off. So I think with that being the case, it's only logical for me to have ultimately ended up here and also being honest with myself about what I wasn't getting in my past life, my past professional life, and what it is that I wanted and what it is that I wanted to contribute to other people. Because I think my life, at least the way that I'm going to measure success, isn't the things that we buy or the homes or whatever. And of course, I want nice things and have nice things. And I think everyone should have nice things uh, within reason. Any of the things that will actually add to your life, not simply be a part of the collection or part of what you show off to other people because you're not living for them. But I think that's all well and good. But the contribution to other people, even if people don't remember your name, the
Mhm.
impact that you may have on someone today or the lessons that they learned from you that they may teach to somebody else who never even knew you existed.
Mhm.
To me, that is much more meaningful because you're contributing to the enhancement of people's lives, and to me, that's really important.
Mhm. So when you think about your own work in your body of work, and so I'm very interested in conflict, is what I talk with people about.
Mhm.
How have you dealt with conflict at work? Has it evolved over time or been about the same? And how do you do it so that it's fruitful?
Yeah, that's so you've asked a number of questions there, all good. So I think it's probably evolved over time. I think there are times when, and I'm not sure if there's anything necessarily wrong with this, but it is certainly a particular style. So, for example, the role that I had as an auditor, you can probably imagine there's going to be a lot of conflict and people
Mhm.
aren't necessarily happy, even if you're trying to help them and even if you're telling them ultimately that they've done a good job. They're nervous, they're angry, they're reflecting on their prior experience with other people. or whatever they're anticipating about you.
Mhm.
For me, my process has always been a lot of clarity up
Mhm.
front. I've had that expectation of my teams. I've had that expectation of my stakeholders, and I've told them, I think this is the expectation you should have of me. We should be clear. We should be transparent. Uh, when there are topics or issues that seem like we can't quite get them resolved, then again, step in with patience, clarity, go back to square one and work our way up to where we are today. And I try to do that in a very thoughtful and clear way. However, once I've done that, if you continue to push back unduly, or I feel that there's obfuscation in some way, or the team isn't getting what they need from you or your team, then my patience is pretty much at zero at that point. Now, what does that mean? It means that I'm just going to be very direct and clear about why I think we're having these problems and what I think we need to do to resolve them. So for me, being conflictual, I mean, some people will call that conflict, which I think it clearly is if you talk about two or more entities that are not in alignment or that are bumping heads. But I don't know that that is a bad thing necessarily at all. Friction, tension, the things that that create polish or the things that have created mountains. I mean,
Mhm.
this is really things bumping up against each other. And in the end, you can still end up with something that is great. I've seen and experienced, observed otherwise tremendous relationships, lots of very strong relationships and strong outcomes coming as the result of what was initially conflictual,
Mhm.
people calling someone out or calling out a problem or a concern, as opposed to just being peaceable and allowing things to go the way that they were going. So it's not inherently bad at all. For some people, it may be problematic. For some people, it may not be done effectively, right? Conflict can be quite destructive.
Mhm.
It can be disastrous, but in and of itself, I think it can be useful. For me, I don't think that I've had any conflict that's been disastrous. I think there's definitely been opportunities for me and for others along the way to take things away and to learn lessons from it. But that's also consistent with life. I think
Mhm.
the inverse, I don't know what is the inverse of conflict? I guess, we would think of peace, we would think of calm and tranquility, and generally those things are good. But as I kind of alluded to a moment ago, there are plenty of times when that is just simply the wrong thing.
Mhm.
When you look at what's happening in the world today, across the regions, in different environments, I was watching the World Cup a whole lot of late, even in football, which is a lovely game, and I really enjoy watching it. There's some very ugly things that happen sometimes off the pitch,
Mhm.
sometimes on the pitch, but usually off the pitch. If you are peaceable and you're calm and you're tranquil, you might say nothing about that. But that is exactly where we need conflict. That's exactly where we need to call people out and to address things in sometimes in a loud voice. I'm not literally in a loud voice in terms of the workplace or our homes, but in a meaningful, clear, transparent way that affects or that aims to affect change. So I think there's tremendous complexity or some complexity anyway in how we first think about conflict, think about its utility, whether it's useful, and how we approach it. What do we learn from it?
Mhm.
And does it leave us in a stronger place collectively and individually or not?
Mhm. Yes, right. Conflict is not the problem. In fact, sometimes lack of conflict is a problem.
Right?
It's what are we doing with it? Um, and asking these really good questions. If we don't engage in this, what is likely to happen? Are we going to be stronger? Are we going to be weaker? And if there is a conflict, doesn't mean there's a problem. It's
Right?
very natural. We ought to have conflict. That means
Right?
we're not all thinking the same, wanting the same, seeing the same things. And so being able to disagree well, being able to major on the problem's the problem, not the person, right? How do
Right?
we really look at behaviors? And if we, sometimes when people think about conflict, okay, we're going to have these dialogues and we're just going to talk it all out. Well, okay, well, sometimes we're just not going to agree. And so what are we going to do next? What are the consequences? Once we understand, let's suppose like civility at work, what is civility at work here? What are we going to allow? What are we not going to allow? And if somebody transverses that, what are going to be the consequences? What are going to be the rewards for being civil. And being civil is not rocking the boat. I would think that's incivility. That's a mask of kindness. Real kindness is telling people the truth, telling
Right.
them the lay of the land,
Right.
and that's treating people as adults.
Hmm.
We treat people as children when we don't let them know what's really going on, when we don't trust that they have any sort of emotional capacity, or we
Right.
don't give people the opportunity to develop resilience, to hear those difficult things and move forward. So conflict, having difficult conversations, it's all about how it feels internally, right? Because from the outside, it might be difficult to tell somebody they're not performing, but it may not be difficult for me, given my relationship with them, given what the performance is, given what the clear directives are. But sometimes it is very fraught because maybe it is my boss or my best friend or my work nemesis. And so I feel a certain way. When that happens to you, when it feels difficult, how do you push through to have those conversations instead of not?
So I don't know that I ever don't have the conversation.
Mm,
Feeling the feeling of difficulty is one that I'm just accustomed to.
mm,
But I don't, it's ironic. I think if you don't hold yourself above others, then you don't hold your feelings above others, then you don't, then you probably don't cater to your feelings nearly as much.
mm,
And so in that way, I don't really cater to my feelings that much. And that's a balance that I think I have to strike
mm,
because it's very common for people, men, to override their feelings and their emotions. I think that's generally, though, when we think about, softer, more tender emotions. But in terms of conflict, in terms of feeling uncomfortable, in terms of feeling discomfort, I'm also able to override those. I mean, this is how we accomplish things. This is how we push ourselves to do things that we've not done before. And so for me, once I've decided that the end game is more important or that we should be abiding by this North Star, I'm quite comfortable I'm comfortable being uncomfortable,
mm,
but I know that what I'm doing is something that I believe in. So I'm approaching it as best as I can from a good faith perspective. Well,
mm,
not as best as I can. I'm approaching it from a good faith perspective and hoping that the outcome will be as good as I can help to make it. Where I sort of lose patience is when I don't feel or when there's evidence that others are not engaging in good faith. Now,
mm,
to the extent that I can just walk away and leave you where you are, that's fine. If there's nothing in it for me, really, I'm not going to go and strike up a challenging conversation about something that may be helpful to you when certainly, at least at this time, I can see that that is clearly not what you want. You're not receptive to it.
mm,
Right. So I'm not going to confront you with something that maybe you are already struggling with. Maybe my leaving you alone is giving you the space to do your work and build your relationship. I
mm.
can't possibly know that. If
Yeah.
it's important enough to me and if you're important enough to me, then maybe I'll revisit it. But just because I see it now and I want to speak to you about it doesn't mean that that needs to happen now. I can still be tactful and thoughtful and a little more delicate about how I approach it.
Mm,
That's different than in a workspace or work environment where
mhm,
we're on the clock, we've got a deadline, something needs to happen before something worse happens, a conversation needs to happen before other big conversations happen. Those are the situations when, to your point, we are adults and we should think about and treat each other like adults. I think that kind of goes both ways. I will treat you like an adult, but I hope that you will act like an adult. I
mhm,
will try to come to this situation like an adult, and I'm hopeful that you will as well, because I might also need you as a partner in this
mhm,
whole thing. We may not be working truly, we may not be feeling like we're partners, but to the extent that we are engaging and to the extent that we both say that here's our North Star, or here's the organization, or here's the principle, or the regulation, or whatever, the moral values that we care about, then we are in partnership. And
mhm,
so the better that you can show up to that conversation, maybe you can help me in my moments of weakness
mhm,
to keep the conversation constructive. So I don't really have too much trouble having the difficult conversation. I may be uncomfortable. There may be times when I'm even a little bit nervous, but that's not going to stop anything from happening on my side.
mhm. I love that phrase, not catering to my emotions. It, I'm going to think more about that. I think sometimes we run the the two sides of denying, like stuffing down our emotions, sort of like people pleasers. I'm going to stuff all this down and cater to because I'm uncomfortable with my emotions. Then there's the other of I'm just a reactive, right?
Right,
But as you just said at the end, I may feel nervous, but I still act, right? And
right.
so not denying our emotional responses, there's just really good information and we have them anyway. But what am I going to do anyway? And it sounds like you've really habituated yourself to okay, I'm having these emotions, but I'm still going to act in this particular way for this particular good.
Absolutely, because I'm not the most important person or entity in the scenario, right?
Mm,
So if we're doing something that is for the good of a company or for the good of millions of people or thousands of people or dozens of people, then at the end of the day, should my feelings or my inability or unwillingness to speak up negatively impact those people potentially?
mm,
Then I would be putting myself above those people, is the way that
mm,
I see it, right?
mm,
I would be saying that protecting my own feelings in this instant, in this moment, is more significant than putting in place maybe a process that will repeatedly and scalably help many more people, whether I'm here or not.
mm,
And so to me, it's beyond it's beyond childish. It's beyond sort of cowardly. It's my responsibility, right?
mm,
I don't know that you have to be particularly brave, but I think you do need to be decisive. And I think once you can sort of put yourself in the appropriate frame, then it becomes a lot easier. Now, that's my frame. That's the way that
mm,
I do it. I'm not saying that everyone has to do it that way, but there may be many other ways and methods for you to come to, the same or similar conclusion. But I think we just need to think a little more broadly than just ourselves.
mm,
Yes, how do I feel? What's going to happen to me? But what is my responsibility? And it kind of goes back to what I said earlier about why I'm doing what I do, because I actually care about people and I want more people to benefit as a result of my time, my life, my knowledge, my curiosity. And I can't do that by constantly being comfortable.
mm, mm. Yeah, I mean, navel gazing, sometimes people think about, when I'm being self-reflective, it's just me, me, me. But I think you get what you're talking about when you are reflecting about what you want and how you're showing up. It can be a mirror of me and you together, right? Reciprocal altruism. I'm important, but so are you. I'm not more
Right.
important than you, or vice versa. So we're in this together. So now I'm going to act not just out of fear, not just out of self-protection. You're going to make certain kinds of decisions if that's your mode than if
Absolutely.
you are thinking about me and you. I
Yeah. I mean,
see
I
our,
think
okay, go ahead.
so. You're about to say our time is winding down. I was just going to make this one comment. I
Mhm,
think the irony, of course, is that, it can easily come across as you putting yourself above or ahead of other people if you're the one who continues to press on a topic.
mhm,
So, how you frame it is very important. And sometimes that's easy to get wrong.
mhm,
But I think if you start with that, here's why, here's my objective, here's what I'm intending to be the outcome, then maybe people can have a slightly better understanding. I read an article just this morning that said never disagree. And the idea was not that we should never disagree, but that we should, in summary, not start out our response with I disagree, or
mhm,
even I'm not sure about that. Something positive, something that aligns with the person on some level,
mhm,
even if it's not something that they've explicitly said, but that you could relatively reasonably deduce, or that may be true of most people, that could be something that allows them to listen as opposed to clam up and shut down, and
mhm,
that could allow you to be persuasive. And that's something that I took particular note of. I think Dale Carnegie spoke about many of these similar methods and kind of psychological tricks, if you want to call it that, in his book, How to Win Friends and Influence People. But these are all sort of not new ideas, right? These
mhm.
are tried and true ideas, but that are difficult to master and sometimes difficult to remember.
Yeah. You've said many times good faith, but if this is your intention, that's what you're trying to do, and so maybe you say something wrong, it gives you the impetus to come back because
Yes,
you've got this goal and you know what your intention is. We know intention and impact are different, and so you see it doesn't land. Real communication is not just saying what you want, but right, communicating. So if I disagree with somebody and I say I disagree, well, then I'm not actually being able to communicate with that person, right? Because I have shut them down. And so
That's right.
finding those bridges, the more bridges we build, the more we can hear what they're really saying, and the more they can hear what we're saying, and we can have actual dialogue instead of talking at each other. So I
Right.
see our time is running out. I want to hear a little bit more about your book, and I'm curious about the title, the first part of it, The New Alpha. To me, that is a very evocative. Alpha is a very evocative term. So why that title?
Well, why is it evocative?
When I think of alpha, I think of aggressive male. That's what comes to mind.
Hmm.
And I'm interested in everything you've been talking about. I'm interested in collaboration.
Right.
I'm interested in community. I'm interested in how do we work together within frameworks, within, best practices and respectful practices.
Right. Yeah. So the book is entitled, The New Alpha, Be Three Times the Leader Through Balance, Not Dominance. And
Mhm.
so the subtitle perhaps gives you a little more sense of where I'm going with that. But I think it's really important to, if you're trying to engage a community, to not suddenly say, uh, forget everything you've known, forget everything that you are, because there is some good in what you've been. But just like we just finished talking about, it's really important to kind of meet people where they are and to help them to see how they can be a little bit better bit by bit. I don't know that there's anything inherently wrong with being alpha in some ways, but I think what it has come to mean and what people have accepted it as meaning has been dominant, not listening. I'm not really a fan of the phrase toxic masculinity, but there's this kind of toxicity that people associate with it. The reality is, and I start out with earlier in the book, I talk a little bit about how gender differences came to exist from the time of hunter-gatherer, right? Simply, if you were a human being with more testosterone than another human being, then you probably were able to run faster, carry greater weight, hunt, protect, and so forth. And so those were your responsibilities. And
Mhm.
so the title is intended to reflect the entire arc of humankind, the entire arc for men, also the utility of emotions, why they are in existence, what they intend to do, how we've essentially bastardized that over time, and what it is that we can do to rebalance that or create, again, this balance. And I spoke about the three domains, the relationships at work, the relationships at home, and the relationship with yourself. And so really focusing on those three, incorporating those three, and figuring out ways to balance those three are what I'm hoping that people will take away from the book and find very specific ways to go about doing it. But in
Mhm.
terms of who appealing to and who I think can read the book and who might benefit most. By the way, the book is also for women because women are leading men. Women are raising sons. Women are, they have husbands and fathers and brothers, all sorts of people that they want to and have to deal with. So it's going to be useful for you to understand what some of the challenges are, what some of the opportunities are, so that you can help to drive some of that change as well. So yes, I recognize that it's a little bit provocative, but that's also why I framed it as the new alpha, not
Right.
the old alpha.
Right. That's very interesting. And I like an evocative term because it makes me think about, okay, well, obviously, what is being said here? What is the point? And thinking about what an alpha is. Like, if you think about, good leadership, right? So
Hmm.
what is it? What is it that we want when we think about we I'm a for if we can't just have lead if we have leaderlessness, that is problematic. We want the right leader at the right time. And
Right,
I'm very interested because I am interested in emotions. The more I get into this work with conflict management, the more I'm really interested in emotional intelligence and what it is and what we should be paying attention to and what we shouldn't be paying attention to.
right.
But it is a balance and emotional literacy. We just I don't know what happened to it, if it ever really was a thing. But most of us are not that great at it. And
Right.
that's unfortunate because then we become constrained and blown by those emotions instead of having them just inform the decisions that we make.
Yeah, just very quickly, I'll add to that. I mean, socially, I think we've narrowed things down. If you think about what does it mean to be, what it means to be professional, For a man or for a woman, it probably means reducing to a great extent your emotions,
Mm,
reducing your true thoughts, staying within a very closed framework, a very
mm,
narrow framework. But is that really useful? Is it really helpful? It's safe.
mm,
It reduces litigation, right? It reduces how many people are going to sue the company for something that somebody else said, which may or may not have been problematic or may not have been intended to be inflammatory. But I think that alone, if you think about it in that context, the way that you are in the rest of your life, even as funny as you may be or as open as you would like to be, you say, no, I'm in this position now. I've got to think and present myself in this way. I'm not suggesting that's bad entirely. I'm not suggesting that it's useless or, in fact, not even necessary. In some ways, it clearly is. But in other ways, it's not as if there are no byproducts
mhm,
or no disadvantages that come along with that. So if you spend 40 or 50 hours reducing how you behave, framing how you behave, being hyper vigilant about what you say, where, and how, then who you are is going to feel constrained if you're not careful.
mhm,
Now, to be clear, I'm not suggesting that you I've never been a fan of bringing your whole self to work
agreed.
because your whole self also goes to yoga, maybe, or goes to the beach. That's not the way to come to work,
Right.
right? Understood. But I think within that, even though there are these parameters, we have to also make sure that the other parts of us aren't going to atrophy, that we're
Mhm,
going to forget who we are or deaden certain parts of ourselves because we will then be deadening some of our emotions, in my opinion.
mhm. It was really interesting, this reduction. Hmm. A lot to think about. So my last question for you is, as you look into the future of work, what do you think needs to happen so that not only will all workers be treated with dignity and respect, but that they'll be encouraged to thrive and flourish?
So I'm a realist. I don't consider myself a pessimist, but I would say, quite frankly, that all workers will never be treated with dignity and respect
Okay.
for the same reasons that all people will never be. To the extent that we have national differences that escalate to xenophobia, because you can have differences, to the extent that we have gender differences where either or both genders aren't respecting the others, uh, when there are racial differences and abuse, these things are an unfortunate reality and they color the way that we live and they color the way that we work and the ways in which we work together. So I think with that as a baseline,
Mhm.
I would start there. But I think, I had a conversation with somebody maybe less than a year ago, and she said something. I don't remember if she caveated it by saying this might sound corny, but I know that when she said it, even though it made tremendous sense to me and I liked it, I thought this does sound a bit corny. And she said, the closer we get to inner peace, the closer we get to world peace. And that sounds like a, very rainbowy, kind of fluffy statement, but how true is it?
Yeah.
I think it's totally
Yeah.
true. If you
Right.
think about conflicts and the wars, how much of that is rooted in ego, greed, selfishness, a lack of respect for other people, a lack of respect for other people's sovereignty, territory, values, resources. We want them for ourselves, and they shouldn't have it, and we're willing to lie, cheat, and steal to get it, kill to get it. Uh, if we have people who are more comfortable with who they are, who are satisfied with what they have, or even if you're not satisfied, who will work incrementally and in a good faith way. Since you referenced my references to good faith, I thought I'd throw one more in there for you. Then I think you would have a much better world, isn't it?
Yeah.
And we've got just really a few hundred people who are the key decision makers globally,
Mhm.
key governments, key officials, key businesses. These are the people who are making the world the way that it is largely. If those people and the rest of us as followers are able to have a stronger relationship with ourselves, have a truer North Star, and more care for people, then we actually have a better world in which to live. which by extension could only mean that we have a better working environment. So that doesn't mean that all hope is lost and work is doomed, but I think it's a clearly an offshoot of what's happening more broadly. Now, how can we affect the cultures? Because you can have work and organizational cultures that are very much what we aspire to.
Mhm.
Again, it requires having a clear definition of what we're looking for, not just technically, but also in terms of behaviors, in terms of values, in terms of how we treat people, how we treat conflict, what's our mission for the organization, but even then, what other things might we do, or how else might we contribute to our environment in a positive way? So I think there are a number of things to do, but certainly not thinking about, the almighty dollar exclusively, or the almighty yen, or whatever your currency is exclusively, is probably one way of going at it. How do we encourage other people to be better uh, as themselves? How do we get them to work better? All of those things are going to impact the work culture. So it will never be perfect. It will never be fully equal. But I think we have to, take care of our little corner. I'll end on this. I don't know if it's an adage or a proverb that I've heard before, but it says, if if each before their doorstep swept, the world would be clean and kept,
Mhm.
or the city would be clean and kept.
Mhm.
And so, if we just do our little part,
Mhm.
then I think we can contribute meaningfully.
I love that. Well, everyone, listeners, I encourage you to go get Kenyada's new book, The New Alpha, Be 3 times the Leader Through Balance, Not Dominance.
Thank
Thank
you
you
so
so much for
much.
your time. I really enjoyed our conversation.
Me too.
Kenyada, thank you so much for being on Conflict Managed and the work that you're doing. Really thoughtful conversation we just had. And there's a lot that you said that I'm going to be thinking about. As I mentioned in the podcast, I'm interested in emotions and the part they have to play. And I really liked your emphasis on, are we doing this individual work? But it's not just looking inward, it's looking outward. I am a part of a broader community. And I think that might be really helpful for some to get that motivation to act for your good and the good of others. Conflict Managed is produced by Third Party Workplace Conflict Restoration Services and hosted by me, Mary Brown. You can find us online at 3pconflictrestoration.com. Come back, we have new episodes every Tuesday. And if you would like and subscribe wherever you are listening or watching this podcast, it's much appreciated. Our music is courtesy of Dove Pilot. And remember, conflict is normal and expected. Let's deal with it. Until next time, take care.